I caught my brother forging my signature to steal our grandma's inheritance. 6 months later he overdoses and reveals a dark family secret. I'm Carmen, 28, and I have an older brother, Charlie, who's 30. We grew up in a small coastal town in Oregon, where everyone knew each other. Our childhood was pretty idyllic until our mom passed away when I was 6 and Charlie was 8. She had been battling cancer for years, and although we knew it was coming, it still hit us hard. After Mom died, our dad threw himself into his work. He's a commercial fisherman, and he'd be gone for weeks at a time. It wasn't that he didn't care about us, he was just trying to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. But his absence meant that Charlie and I spent most of our time with our grandmother, Nana Rose. Nana Rose was a force of nature. She was in her early 60s when she took on the responsibility of raising us, and she did it with gusto. She lived in this big, rambling Victorian house on the edge of town, with a wild garden that seemed to go on forever. Charlie and I would spend hours exploring that garden, pretending we were on grand adventures. Nana Rose was also the keeper of our family history. She had this huge trunk in the attic filled with old photos, letters, and keepsakes. On rainy days, which were frequent in our little coastal town, she'd bring down the trunk and tell us stories about our ancestors. There was great-great-grandpa Oliver, who'd come over from Ireland during the potato famine and started a fishing business. And great-aunt Mabel, who'd been a suffragette and once chained herself to the town hall to protest for women's rights. Charlie and I were incredibly close back then. He was my protector, my confidant, my partner in crime. We'd make up elaborate stories about the people in Nana's old photos, giving them secret lives and daring escapades. We had our own secret language, a mishmash of made-up words and inside jokes that no one else could understand. As we got older, things started to change. Charlie began to struggle in school. He was smart, but he had trouble focusing and sitting still. The teachers suggested he might have ADHD, but Dad brushed it off, saying Charlie just needed more discipline. Looking back, I think that's when Charlie started to feel like he wasn't good enough. In high school, Charlie fell in with a rough crowd. It started small, skipping classes, smoking cigarettes behind the gym. But it escalated quickly. By his junior year, he was drinking heavily and experimenting with drugs. I tried to talk to him about it, but he'd brush me off, saying I was being a goody two-shoes. Despite this, we still maintained a close relationship. Charlie would sneak back into the house late at night, and I'd help cover for him with Dad and Nana Rose. I thought I was helping him, but now I realize I was just enabling his behavior. Things came to a head when Charlie was 18. He got caught trying to steal prescription pills from the local pharmacy. It was a small town, so naturally, everyone found out. Dad was furious. He gave Charlie an ultimatum: get clean or get out. Charlie chose to leave. For the next few years, we only heard from Charlie sporadically. He'd call on holidays, usually sounding drunk or high. He'd promise to come visit, to get his life together, but it never happened. Meanwhile, I focused on my studies and got accepted to college in Portland. Nana Rose passed away 2 years ago, just after I graduated college. It hit us all hard, but Charlie took it especially badly. He showed up to the funeral looking gaunt and strung out. He caused a scene, accusing Dad of not doing enough to save Mom, of driving him away. It was awful. After the funeral, we learned about the inheritance. Nana Rose had left everything to be split equally between Charlie and me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial, enough to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a house. For Charlie, it could have been a fresh start. The day we were supposed to meet with the lawyer to finalize everything, Charlie didn't show up. I tried calling him, but his phone was off. The lawyer suggested we reschedule, so we did. This happened 3 more times over the next month. Each time, Charlie had an excuse: he was sick, his car broke down, he had to work. I was getting frustrated, but I tried to be understanding. Finally, 2 months ago, I got a call from the lawyer. He sounded uncomfortable and asked if I could come to his office. When I arrived, he dropped a bombshell on me. Charlie had come in a week earlier, forged my signature, and claimed the entire inheritance for himself. He had already transferred all the money out of the account. I was in shock. I couldn't believe my brother, my childhood best friend, would do this to me. The lawyer advised me to file a police report, but I hesitated. This was my brother, after all. I decided to confront Charlie first. I drove to his apartment in a sketchy part of Portland, my hands shaking as I knocked on the door. When he opened it, I barely recognized him. He looked gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes and sores on his face. The apartment reeked of alcohol and something chemical that made my nose burn. I demanded an explanation, but Charlie just laughed in my face. He said he needed the money more than I did, that he had debts to pay off. When I reminded him that I had student loans and dreams of buying a house, he sneered and said I could always find a rich husband. He said I was just like Dad, always looking down on him, never understanding how hard things were for him. In that moment, I realized the brother I knew and loved was gone. This person in front of me was a stranger. I told him I was going to the police, and he actually threatened me. He said if I did that, he'd make sure I regretted it. He knew people, he said, dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to hurt me or Dad. I left his apartment in tears, feeling betrayed and heartbroken. I drove straight to Dad's house and told him everything. Dad was furious. He wanted to go confront Charlie himself, but I talked him out of it. Instead, we went to the police together and filed a report. The investigation has been ongoing for the past 2 months, but I'm not hopeful. Since Charlie forged my signature so well, it's become a case of my word against his. The police say these cases are often difficult to prove. I've had to move back in with Dad temporarily, as I can no longer afford to live on my own. My dreams of buying a house have been put on hold indefinitely. I've picked up extra shifts at the cafe where I work, trying to save whatever I can, but it feels like I'm back at square one. Yesterday, I received a text message from Charlie. It was the first time he'd reached out since everything happened. The message read, "I messed up. Can we talk?" I'm conflicted. Part of me wants to hear him out, to understand why he did what he did. Maybe there's an explanation that will make sense of all this. But another part of me is scared and angry. He betrayed me in the worst way possible, and I'm not sure I can ever forgive him. I keep thinking about the trunk in Nana Rose's attic, all those family stories of perseverance and strength. I wonder what she would say if she could see us now. Would she be disappointed? Would she know how to fix this? I don't know what to do. Should I meet with Charlie? Is there any coming back from this kind of betrayal? Any advice would be appreciated. Update 1. It's been about a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. Thank you all for your support and advice. It really helped me gain perspective on the situation. After much consideration, I decided to meet with Charlie. Many of you advised against it, and looking back, I should have listened. But I couldn't shake the memory of the little boy who used to protect me from imaginary monsters, who held my hand at Mom's funeral. I arranged to meet him in a public place, a cafe near our dad's house. I asked Dad to wait nearby, just in case things went south. When Charlie showed up, he looked even worse than before. He'd lost more weight, and his hands were shaking as he sat down. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but then I remembered why we were there. Charlie started by apologizing profusely. He said he'd hit rock bottom Charlie and realized what a terrible mistake he'd made. He claimed he'd been in deep with some dangerous people and needed the money to pay them off. When I asked why he didn't just ask for help, he said he was too ashamed and thought he could fix it on his own. As he talked, I couldn't help but think about the last time I'd seen him before all this happened. It was at Nana Rose's funeral. He'd shown up late, reeking of alcohol, and picked a fight with Dad in the middle of the service. I'd been so embarrassed, so angry. But later, I found him sitting alone in Nana's garden, crying like a little boy. He'd looked up at me and said, "I don't know how to be good anymore, Carmen." I should have reached out then, should have tried harder to help him. But as I listened to his story at the cafe, something felt off. His eyes kept darting around, and he seemed more nervous than remorseful. When I pressed him for details about these dangerous people, his story started to fall apart. He couldn't keep his lies straight. Finally, I'd had enough. I told him I knew he was lying and demanded the truth. That's when things took a turn. Charlie's demeanor changed completely. He dropped the act and sneered at me, saying I was naive and stupid for believing him. He said he'd spent all the money on drugs and gambling, and he'd do it again if he had the chance. I was stunned. This person in front of me was truly not the brother I grew up with. As I got up to leave, Charlie grabbed my arm and hissed that if I didn't drop the police investigation, he'd make sure I regretted it. That's when Dad, who had been watching from nearby, intervened. He pulled Charlie off me and told him to leave before he called the police. As Charlie stormed off, I broke down in tears. Dad hugged me and told me he was proud of me for standing my ground. We went home, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sad because I'd lost my brother, but relieved because I finally had clarity about the situation. That night, Dad and I stayed up late, talking about Charlie and our family. Dad opened up about his own struggles after Mom died, how he'd thrown himself into work because he didn't know how to be a single parent. He said he regretted not being there more for us, especially for Charlie. He wondered aloud if things would have been different if he'd gotten Charlie help when the teachers first suggested he might have ADHD. The next day, I went to the police station and gave them a full account of what had happened at the cafe, including Charlie's threats. They took it seriously and said they'd be increasing their efforts on the case. In the weeks since then, I've been focusing on moving forward with my life. I've picked up extra shifts at work and started looking into scholarships to help with my student loans. It's not the same as having the inheritance, but it's a start. I've also been spending more time with Dad. We've been going through Nana Rose's old trunk, looking at family photos and reading old letters. It's been bittersweet, but it's helped me remember the good times with Charlie without excusing his current behavior. Last week, I found an old photo album I'd never seen before. It was full of pictures of Mom when she was young, before she got sick. There was one of her and Dad on their wedding day, looking so young and happy. And there was one of Mom holding newborn Charlie, with toddler me peering curiously at the baby. It made me wonder what Mom would think of all this. Would she be disappointed in Charlie? In me, for not being able to help him? I've been having vivid dreams about my childhood. In one, Charlie and I are in Nana's garden, playing our old make-believe games. But every time I try to catch up to him, he disappears into the fog. I wake up feeling like I've lost something I can never get back. As for Charlie, I haven't heard from him since that day at the cafe. Part of me is relieved, but another part still worries about him. Dad has tried reaching out, but Charlie isn't responding to him either. I'm still processing everything that's happened, but I feel stronger now. I know it's going to be a long road, but I'm determined to rebuild my life, with or without that inheritance. Thank you all again for your support. I'll update if there are any significant developments. Update 2. It's been about 2 months since my last update, and things have taken an unexpected turn. I want to thank everyone who's been following my story and offering support. It means more than you know. About 3 weeks ago, I got a call from the police. They had finally tracked down most of the money Charlie had stolen. It turns out he hadn't spent it all as he claimed. He had transferred a large portion of it to an offshore account, thinking it would be untraceable. Fortunately, the investigators were able to follow the trail. The detective told me that they found Charlie's laptop during a raid on a known drug house. Apparently, Charlie had been staying there on and off. The laptop contained records of the money transfers, as well as emails that implicated several other people in a larger drug operation. The detective said Charlie's information could be valuable in bringing down this network. The process of recovering the money is ongoing, but the detective assured me that I should be able to reclaim a significant portion of my inheritance. It's a huge relief, but it also brings up mixed emotions. I'm grateful to potentially get the money back, but it doesn't undo the betrayal. A week after the police called, I received a letter from Charlie. He's in rehab. Apparently, after our confrontation at the cafe, he went on a major bender and ended up in the hospital with an overdose. It was a wake-up call for him, and he checked himself into a rehabilitation facility. In the letter, Charlie apologized again for everything he'd done. He explained that he'd been struggling with addiction for years, hiding it from the family. He traced it back to high school, when he started taking Adderall to help with his undiagnosed ADHD. It spiraled from there. The inheritance money, he said, had been too much temptation. He convinced himself that he could use it to finally get clean, to start a new life. Instead, it sent him into a downward spiral. He got involved with some dangerous people, thinking he could outsmart them. But he quickly found himself in over his head. He said he understands if I never want to speak to him again, but he hoped that someday I might be able to forgive him. He's working through the 12 steps and wants to make amends, starting with paying back every cent he stole. I didn't respond to the letter right away. I needed time to process everything. Part of me wants to believe him, to have my brother back. But another part remembers his lies at the cafe and wonders if this is just another manipulation. I discussed it with Dad, and he suggested we visit Charlie at the rehab facility. After much deliberation, I agreed. We went last weekend, and it was intense. Charlie looked better physically, but emotionally he was raw. He broke down crying when he saw us, apologizing over and over. We had a long, difficult conversation. Charlie admitted to everything: the addiction, the theft, the lies. He said he hit rock bottom Charlie after our confrontation and realized he needed help. He's been clean for 30 days now and is committed to his recovery. During our visit, Charlie shared some things about his struggles that I had never known. He talked about feeling like a failure compared to me, always the problem child while I was the good one. He said he'd started using drugs to numb the pain of feeling like he could never measure up. It was hard to hear, but it helped me understand his perspective a little better. I told Charlie that while I'm glad he's getting help, I'm not ready to forgive him yet. The trust between us is broken, and it will take more than words to rebuild it. He said he understands and that he's prepared to put in the work, no matter how long it takes. As we were leaving, Charlie handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for a portion of the money he stole, along with a promissory note for the rest. He said it's not nearly enough, but it's a start. He also gave me an old photo he'd kept in his wallet all these years, a picture of the two of us with Nana Rose in her garden. We couldn't have been more than 7 and 9 years old, gap-toothed and grinning. It brought tears to my eyes. I'm still processing everything. On one hand, I'm relieved that Charlie is finally getting help and that I might get my inheritance back. On the other hand, the hurt and betrayal are still fresh. I'm cautiously optimistic but also wary. For now, I'm focusing on my own life. I've started looking at houses again, allowing myself to dream a little. I'm also considering going back to school to finish my degree. Whatever happens with Charlie, I'm determined to move forward. I'll update again if there are any major developments. Thank you all for your continued support and advice. Update 3. It's been about 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share what's been happening. A lot has changed, both in my life and in my relationship with Charlie. First, the good news: I've finally received most of my inheritance back. The legal process was long and complicated, but in the end, I was able to reclaim about 80% of what was originally left to me. It's not everything, but it's enough to make a significant difference in my life. I used some of the money to pay off my student loans, which was an incredible feeling. I've also put a down payment on a small house. It's a cozy 2-bedroom cottage not far from where we grew up. The backyard reminds me a bit of Nana Rose's garden, and I've started planting some of the flowers she used to grow. Every time I work in the garden, I think of her and the stories she used to tell us. As for Charlie, He completed his 90-day rehab program and has been sober for 6 months now. He's been attending NA meetings regularly and has found a job working at a local community center, helping at-risk youth. It's a role that seems to suit him, given his own experiences. He's still living in a halfway house, taking his recovery one day at a time. Our relationship is complicated. We're not close like we used to be, and I don't know if we ever will be again. But we're talking. We meet for coffee every couple of weeks, always in public places. Sometimes Dad joins us. These meetings are often awkward and emotionally charged, but we're trying. During one of our coffee meetings, Charlie shared more about his struggles with addiction. He talked about the shame and self-loathing that fueled his drug use, and how he'd always felt like he was living in my shadow. It was hard to hear, but it helped me understand his perspective better. I shared my own feelings of guilt for not realizing how much he was struggling, for not doing more to help him. We both had a lot to process. Charlie has been consistent in his efforts to make amends. He's been paying me back in small installments from his new job, even though I told him it wasn't necessary given the recovery of most of the inheritance. He insists on it, saying it's part of his recovery process and a way to rebuild trust. I've seen glimpses of the brother I used to know, his sense of humor, his kindness. Last week, he brought me a small potted plant for my new garden. It was a variety of rose that Nana used to grow. The gesture touched me deeply, but it also brought up a lot of complicated emotions. The trust that was broken isn't easily repaired, and we're both very aware of that. Last month, Charlie asked if I would consider being his sponsor in NA. I was surprised and, honestly, a bit overwhelmed by the request. After thinking it over and discussing it with my own support network, I decided it wasn't a good idea. Our relationship is still too fragile, and I'm not sure I'm equipped to handle that responsibility. Charlie was disappointed but said he understood. As for me, I've been focusing on healing and moving forward. I've reconnected with old friends from high school and college, people I'd lost touch with during the chaos of the past few years. I've even started dating again recently. It's been nice to focus on building new, positive relationships. I've also been spending a lot of time with Dad. We've grown closer through all of this, and I'm grateful for his unwavering support. We've been talking about taking a family vacation next year, just the three of us. It's a tentative plan, but it feels like a step in the right direction. Last week, I found myself back in Nana Rose's old house. The new owners were kind enough to let me walk through when they heard my connection to the place. Standing in the attic where the old trunk used to be, I was flooded with memories, both good and painful. I realized that while I can't change the past, I can choose how to move forward. Looking back on everything that's happened, I can see how far I've come. The betrayal and hurt are still there, but they don't define me anymore. I'm proud of the strength I've found in myself through this ordeal. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with Charlie. I'm cautiously optimistic but also realistic. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But for now, I'm taking it one day at a time, focusing on my own growth and happiness. Thank you all for following my story and for your support throughout this journey. Your advice and encouragement have been invaluable. I may not update again unless something significant happens, but know that I'm doing well and moving forward with my life.